This video is about how the UK economy raises and spends money. It's from How the Economy Works, which is Unit 2 of OCR Economics GCSE. Before we come on to how the government raises its money, we're going to talk about how it spends it. And it's got 6 main areas of government spending: social protection, health, education, defence, law and order, and debt interest. Social protection is a system of social security benefits. This can be anything from the DOL, which is unemployment-related benefits, to disability allowance and that sort of thing. Health, which in the UK is essentially the NHS, National Health Service, which provides a range of healthcare for the population, and it's also a big employer. Education is provided by the government for all children aged 4 to 16 and up to 18, but everyone has to, by law, stay in education from 4 to 16, but many choose to stay and beyond. Some children choose to go private, but the vast majority of youths choose to be educated in the public sector. Then there's defence. The government provides the country with protection such as the Army, the Air Force and the Navy. This defence is against other countries, rather than within ourselves. Within ourselves, we use law and order, which is trying to prevent crime using systems such as the police, courts and prisons. This helps to make life more enjoyable for the citizens of the UK. And finally there's debt interest, in which the government has much less say in how much it has to pay, because it's just repaying the loans and interest on the loans that it previously borrowed. So say that the UK had borrowed money from China, and we borrowed 10 billion. China not only wants the 10 billion back, but also a previously set percentage as interest, meaning that we have to pay this back, otherwise we'll get into worse trouble and have to pay more and more back to them. Taxes are used by the government to raise money. Taxes are a compulsory form of payment to the government, and there's 2 main types of tax: direct tax and indirect tax. Direct tax is taxes on income and wealth, such as income tax, which raises the most money for the government, and it's paid by people on wages, salaries, pensions, profits and dividends. Then there's national insurance contributions, which are paid by employees and employers, corporation tax, which is a tax on a company's profits, and inheritance tax, which is a tax on a transfer of wealth. Then there's indirect taxes, which are taxes on spending, such as VAT, value-added tax, which is tax on a range of goods and services, and excise duty, which is tax on a specific range of goods, with high excise duty on goods such as tobacco, petrol and alcohol, intended to reduce negative externalities. We're going to come to this later. When the government wants to raise extra revenue, it can choose to raise direct tax and or indirect tax. There's many pros and cons of using both direct taxes and indirect taxes, and we're going to run through the basics of these here. Direct taxes help to reduce inequalities in income or wealth. This is because they're often progressive or proportional. We'll learn more about these words later. On the other hand, direct taxes reduce the incentive to work. This is because workers are less likely to work extra hours or work at all, because they know that a large percentage of the money they earn from working will be taken away by the government. In a few slides, we'll see just how great this amount being taken away really is. Direct taxes are also very noticeable when taken away from income, unlike indirect taxes. This is because they're taken away in one big chunk as shown on your paycheck, rather than in little bits every time you buy something. Indirect taxes are often considered to be the consumer's choice, because it's their choice whether to pay indirect tax, because if they don't want to pay indirect tax, they don't have to make the purchase. Governments can also put taxes on demerit goods, such as tobacco, with external costs, helping to reduce negative externalities, such as pollution or disease. On the other hand, indirect taxes can affect the pattern of demand. This is because some consumers may choose not to buy certain goods and reduce the consumption of these goods and services with higher taxes, so producers have to reduce output and employment, leading to a negative multiplier effect as more and more people become unemployed due to the reduced demand. High taxes on goods such as cigarettes and alcohol often leads to black markets, and governments lose out on the revenue they would have gained from these products had there not been such a high indirect tax. That's quite confusing, so I'm going to give an example. Take Bob. Bob's an alcoholic, and he goes to the shop to buy some beer. Beer at the shop is £5, with excise duty of a further £3, meaning that Bob has to pay £8 for the alcohol in the shop. However, if Bob goes to the black market, they don't put a tax on their products because there's no government involvement, so they sell cheaper, say at £5, so Bob chooses to buy alcohol from the black market rather than the shop, so the government loses out on £3 of revenue. If lots of alcoholics do this, or just normal people who fancy a drink, then the government loses out potentially millions of pounds of revenue. Income is distributed in many ways, with different jobs giving different pay levels. Occupations with a high demand but a low inelastic supply pay a high wage, as do jobs in skilled professions. This is because there's a lack of supply of people who can carry out these jobs, so to try to encourage people to take on the jobs, the employers pay a higher wage. Let's have an example to demonstrate this. John and Julian are twins. John is a hairdresser. It doesn't take much training to be a hairdresser at John's level, so he gets relatively low pay because there's a high supply for this job. Julian is an electrician. It can take many years of training to get to the stage that Julian's at, so he gets a high wage because there's inelastic supply. Inelastic supply means that it takes a long time for supply to increase. The increased demand and reduced supply of electricians makes Julian's job much better paid than John's. Some people rely on the state for their incomes, such as the disabled, who get many benefits, the unemployed, who get job seekers allowance, and pensioners, who get state pension. Some people have their own assets which earn them income, such as renting houses and land. Business owners often have a high income, and people with savings receive interest, helping to supplement their income further. It's unlikely that the original distribution of income will be fair, so the government redistributes income to try to reduce inequalities. It does this by taking tax from high income groups and giving more in benefits to lower income groups. The benefits given to citizens out of tax revenue are known as transfer payments and include state pension, job seekers allowance and child benefits, currently given to parents earning less than a specified amount with up to 2 children under the age of 16. There are 3 main types of taxes: regressive, proportional and progressive. Regressive takes a greater proportion of income from lower incomes. Proportional takes the same proportion of income from all income levels, and progressive takes a smaller proportion of income from lower incomes. Direct taxes tend to be proportional or progressive, whilst indirect taxes are regressive. So why are indirect taxes regressive? VAT is set at a percentage rate of the product cost, currently 20%, making it regressive as it takes a larger percentage of a lower earner's income. An example of this is Sally. Sally earns £200 a week, working part-time, and she wants to buy a football. This football is £15 with £3 tax. This £3 tax is 1.5% of Sally's weekly income, which is quite a bit. But take Phoebe, who's a footballer and earns £20,000 a week. The £3 tax to buy a football is nothing to her. It's only 0.015% of her weekly income. Compare this to Sally, who spent 1.5% of her weekly income on a football, and you'll see that it's quite a big difference. To try to reduce this inequality, the government doesn't impose tax on necessities such as medicine, which reduces the negative effect of the tax. Whilst the medicine will still take a higher proportion of the lower income earner's income, it will be less than had there been tax added. Some indirect taxes, such as excise duty, are very regressive and take a much larger percentage of a lower earner's income. So why is income tax progressive? All income tax payers are given a tax allowance. The current tax allowance is about £9,000. This means that nobody has to pay tax on the first £9,000 that they earn. Any money earned after this is taxed by the government, with 20% of the first £32,000 being taken by the government, and 40% of all taxable income above £32,000 being taken by the government up to £150,000, at which point 45% of all taxable income is taken away. The tax is a lower percentage of a lower income and a higher percentage of a higher income, making the tax progressive. Take Marco, who's a cruise ship entertainer and only earns £8,000 a year. He's within the tax allowance and therefore pays no tax. Jacob's a cricketer earning £30,000 a year. He pays only £6,000 in tax, which is more than Marco, but less than Robert, who's a pilot and earns £100,000 a year. He pays closer to £30,000, which is a massive proportion of his income. This shows that income tax is progressive. But the increased tax rate for higher earners may have some negative effects, discouraging people from going for better paid jobs, or even pushing higher earners to move abroad to escape the high taxes. And now we've come to market failure. Dun dun dun. Market failure is when the market, through demand and supply, fails to allocate resources in the best interests of society as a whole. This could mean that a particular firm isn't being as efficient as it could possibly be. For example, Jim's chair-making firm uses 4 logs to make every bench, when, if it was at maximum efficiency, it would only need 2 logs, meaning that double the number of trees are being cut down that actually need to be cut down, completely reducing habitats and destroying rainforests across the globe. Market failure leads to 2 main types of externalities: production externalities and consumption externalities. Production externalities occur when the production of a particular product or service has a negative external effect on people in society, third parties, who are not part of the production process. They could be due to a manufacturer who is carrying out an action to reduce costs, but this action could increase pollution. Consumption externalities are when consumption leads to negative externalities. An example of this is driving cars, which produces air and noise pollution and creates dangers for drivers, as well as creating congestion. On a happier note, there are sometimes external benefits from production or consumption, known as positive externalities. An example of this is a vaccination, which benefits both the individual, who won't catch the disease themselves, and society, who won't catch the disease from the individual. Luckily for us, the government takes responsibility to correct some cases of market failure, attempting to reduce negative externalities and increase positive externalities. It can do this in many ways. The government can tax harmful items, increasing the price and reducing consumption. An example of this is petrol. As the increased tax increases the price, consumption should fall, reducing harmful emissions and congestion. The least polluting forms of transport have no duty on them, and the government uses road tolls and the congestion charge. Both of these work as an incentive for consumers to switch to bicycles or tandems, which are much more eco-friendly forms of transport. The government also uses laws and regulations to reduce or eliminate negative externalities. For example, the government's banned the use of lead in petrol, as well as public smoking. The government can use subsidies and offer people incentives to change. For example, if the government provided reliable, cheap and convenient public transport, yes, I know it's a bit of a ridiculous suggestion, but people would be more likely to use it instead of private cars, reducing pollution and negative externality. The government could also subsidise public transport, for example, half the cost of a ticket, further encouraging people to take public transport. A final government policy regarding externalities is the provision of merit goods, So the government directly provides goods and services that have a positive externalities, merit goods, such as healthcare and education. If the provision of these was left to the market, there wouldn't be enough for the welfare of citizens, and this would be market failure. And say the government didn't provide healthcare, some people wouldn't be able to afford healthcare, disadvantaging the economy as a whole, because it could lead to the spread of disease and a reduced workforce for the economy. And that's the end of the second third of Unit 2. Yay!